Let's talk a little recruiting. And I got my guy, Steve Wiltfong, sitting next to me, and we're going to break down what it takes to sign a top class. Because, Steve, it's not all about NIL and visits. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, and there's some unsung heroes in college football recruiting that I want to talk about. Let's start at Texas, because Texas Longhorns finished with the #1 class in 2025, and they are cooking on the trail in 2026. Take us behind the scenes. Who is kind of responsible for the organization, and who's the engine behind this Longhorn recruiting?
Well, at the Personnel Symposium this past year in Nashville, you had, so you call them unsung heroes, but these are some of the most important people in college football, and head coaches are they know it, and these folks are starting to be compensated correctly. And you had Alabama's Courtney Morgan, Texas Tech's Joey Blanchard, and Texas's Brandon Harris standing together. And I walked over to those guys and said, here's Millionaires Row right here at the Personnel Symposium. And Brandon Harris did a little right electric slide type move to get off the avenue, Texas's general manager. Well, he can slide right back in because, you know, obviously it was reported at the end of January that Brandon Harris got compensated well. I don't know the exact figures, nor am I all up in his business, but I'm very excited for him that he got a huge raise because he deserves it. He runs the recruiting department at Texas and has his finger on every component of that, from on-campus recruiting to the scouting board to courting players to come to the university, and being the direct line of communication for so many important factors to that program. He was awarded, and Texas is bringing in the #1 ranked recruiting class this cycle, and it's under his leadership. And certainly they have some great coaches that help recruit, but they need the support system to do that. And when you talk to anyone around the Texas program, it's not just about Brandon, you know, and he's quick to deflect that as well. You know, director of recruiting Taylor Searles, you know, director of player personnel John Michael Jones, director of recruiting ops Kendall Perry, recruiting coordinator Jordan Mitchell, assistant director of player personnel Jackson Gleason, and then Jimmy Youngblood, who's also got the same title. They're an army. They work together they work together extremely well. There's a lot of cohesion in that group. There's a lot of people in that group that are eventually going to run their own shop. Mm-hmm. But right now it's Brandon Harris leading the way. He was our top off-field recruiter this recruiting cycle, general manager at Texas, #1 ranked recruiting class. And they had some massive recruiting wins, getting Lance Jackson in the fold early, 5-star edge. They always led for Khalik Lockett, 5-star receiver, but they had to rally for Jonah Williams. They had to get him to campus at the end of summer, steal that lead from Texas A&M, Oregon, A&M, Oklahoma, LSU, all programs that were at one point in better position than Texas for Jonah Williams. Justice Terry, the late recruiting win, that was a lot of work. Cade Phillips, they flipped Cade Phillips from LSU on 5-star corner. So Texas bringing in the #1 ranked recruiting class in the country. Salute to Brandon Harris and that terrific off-field recruiting team in getting it done.
Yeah, absolutely. Texas, incredible run in 2025, and like I said, they're already after in 2026. Now, let's talk a little bit about Ohio State recruiting, because the Buckeyes are coming off that national championship. Yeah, they finished #5 in the 2025 rankings, but they had a bunch of top classes that kind of all culminated in that national championship. And general manager Mark Pantoni has a big hand in that. You've known Mark Pantoni for a while. What is it about what he does that makes Ohio State great?
Well, he's the industry standard. I mean, he is the great leader. That was one of Urban Meyer's first 2 hires when he got to Ohio State. He hired his DFO, then he hired Mark Pantoni.
Actually, he brought Mark Pantoni from Florida, where he was working for him for a couple years with the Florida Gators.
Exactly right. So Mark Pantoni came up as a student assistant at Florida. First, Coach Adazio was the offensive line coach. That was kind of the first person that he impressed, where he was starting to get a voice at Florida. And by the time Urban Meyer's time ended at Florida, he was one of his most trusted staffers of hey, what are we doing with Florida Friday Night Lights? Who are we recruiting? Who's our board? How are we attacking? Who are we hiring on staff to help us do all of that? So at one point, Luke Fickell was the interim coach at Ohio State, and then in a little wing, off to the side. You had Urban Meyer, Mark Pantoni, and I forget the DFO's name. But so Urban Meyer was really one of the first coaches to prioritize that position.
Yeah.
And Mark Pantoni was huge in Ohio State winning their national championship 10 years ago, and he was pivotal in the Buckeyes winning their national championship this year. He's in every conversation. He's who Ryan Day leans on for any kind of counsel for how they're going to handle their recruiting department, NIL department. And when you talk about a guy that's a potential, should have $1 million salary, and you see an opening at Notre Dame right now.
Yeah, good point.
I mean, Notre Dame, they're shooting 69 on the golf course. They're trying to shoot 67. Mm-hmm. Mark Pantoni can get you to 67.
Yeah.
And so I would take a run at Mark Pantoni if I'm Notre Dame. And there's no question that Marcus Freeman knows Mark Pantoni. Sure. He went to Ohio State.
Right,
you know?
Exactly.
So that would be target numero uno for me, as Notre Dame has an open general manager spot in South Bend. And then Ohio State, I would just dude, let's just get you locked in even longer, man, because he's as important. And then he leans on a lot of people there too, man. So, recruiting assistant Parker Webb, Ryan Mayhew, those are guys that they speak highly of around that building. Morgan Phillips is their director of football recruiting and events, and then Nick Murphy and Garen Duhart. They've helped Ohio State recruit a lot of great players over the last cycle, retain players. They've had to battle to keep guys in the fold, but Mark Pantoni is one of the godfathers of off-field recruiting personnel, and he's as valuable to any football staff as there is in the country.
All right. Any other off-field names that you think fans need to recognize right now across the country?
Yeah, obviously at Alabama, number 3 ranked class in the country, Courtney Morgan, Kalen DeBoer leans on him as much as Ryan Day leans on Mark Pantoni. He's a guy that helps Alabama recruit coast to coast, a really good identifier of talent. Marshall Malchow, a similar role at Oregon. He's worked with Dan Lanning at Georgia before. Marshall Malchow has worked for Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Chris Peterson, Jimbo Fisher, and now Dan Lanning. So
seen it all.
He's worked for championship coaches with different personalities. He's involved in the scouting. He's involved in the NIL discussions. He's involved in everything similar to Mark at Ohio State. He does the same thing at Oregon. Some electric off-field recruiters that help. It's their job to help lure in talent. David Cooper at Georgia. If you're on a visit at Georgia, you feel David Cooper.
Right.
I mean, he's leading the photo shoots, the energy. He's at the door, brings so much juice. He's a Georgia native that played linebacker at Indiana that has helped Georgia close out so many high-end recruiting battles. And then over at Auburn, another top 10 class. You don't have a top 10 class if you don't have Kenyatta Watson on your staff.
For sure.
He's
been around for a while.
He was the lead recruiter on Deuce Knight. 5-star quarterback, flips from Notre Dame to Auburn. He's involved in so many other recruitments, particularly out of the state of Georgia, but he was humongous in Auburn landing Deuce Knight. Already has Auburn getting ahead in this 2026 class as they look for a 3rd straight top 10 class. And Hugh Freeze said, hey, when you look at past SEC champions, the one thing that they all had in common is 3 straight top 10 recruiting classes. So as he puts his roster together, he's going to combine 2026, 2025, and 2024. Now, a lot of that was before pre-portal era, so you got to retain these top 10 classes, but so far so good. But so many guys. There's an article on On3 talking about the top 25 classes. I could have went all the way down because it's such a valuable position. So many key off-field recruiting staffs out there in the country that do terrific work. Tyler Barnes at Iowa, to name someone not in the top 20. Top 25, Matt Wilson at Indiana. Those are just a couple guys that are at the top of their game as well.
Yeah, always interesting to go behind the scenes and kind of find out who are the people that make recruiting go at some of these top programs. Steve, thanks for your intel.